Good morning and welcome to the Home Affairs Select Committee. This is our one-off session on police pensions and wellbeing. Apologies for the delay this morning in starting our session. Can I also just welcome the police committee from the Thai Parliament who are observing the committee this morning. You're very, very welcome to Parliament and welcome. The aims for this session this morning are, in panel 1, we want to understand the efficacy of the implementation of the MacLeod remedy, the measures intended to remedy age discrimination that took place due to public service pension reform, and the impact of continued uncertainty on serving and retired officers. And in panel 2, we want to explore the extent to which mental health support across the police service is fit for purpose and what more may need to be done. I also just want to warn those watching the session that some of the content being discussed may be of a distressing nature. And last week was Mental Health Awareness Week, and today we will be exploring police wellbeing, as I've just set out. And I'd like to encourage those in need of support to contact charities who can help, including the Samaritans or Mind. So if I could just welcome our first panel this morning, and we have Mr. Hope from the Police Pensions Q&A Facebook group. I'm just wondering, Mr. Hope, you're online, and then we've got 2 witnesses in the room. So I'll just ask everybody to introduce themselves. Do you want to go first, Mr. Hope? And hopefully we can check that we can hear you okay.
Yes, certainly, thank you. Yeah, my name's Anthony Hope. I'm a retired police officer. I retired in November 2022, and I created the Facebook page effectively as a result of the MacLeod remedy and the ongoing delays to it that we hadn't initially envisaged, and that's basically the reason why I'm here today, to explain that and be a voice for many officers who were affected.
Thank you. Miss Alcott, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I'm Claire Alcock and I'm Head of Police Pensions for MPCC.
Thank you. Mr. Watkins.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Dave Watkins. I'm the Managing Director of XPS. We're one of 12 administrators that work with forces to deliver both the remediation and the ongoing administration of police schemes.
And just to be clear, you are one of a number of companies.
We're one of 12, either third-party administrators or in-house. Some of the forces deliver the services themselves.
Yes, and you can only really speak for your own company.
That's right. Yeah,
you're not speaking on behalf of the other 11.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I thought it might be helpful just to, first of all, we have got limited time today, but I want to give everybody the opportunity to say what they want to say to the committee. I wondered, first of all, if we could start with Miss Alcock in just setting out briefly the problems with the police pension reform that the MacLeod remedy is set to fix, and what it actually does. So if you could just kind of set that out for us, and then I'm going to come to Mr. Hope to set out what his issue is with what's going on. So we're all very clear, if that's, and then we'll come to you, Mr. Watkins. Yeah, absolutely. So Ms. Alcock.
Thank you. Many thanks for the opportunity to talk to HASC about this particularly important project. So in terms of remedy, I think it's helpful for me to draw out what remedy is and what it does, and then particularly how that affects people who are making choices. So we use remedy as the term for rectifying the age discrimination that was found in the pension reforms of 2015, and that was across all of public sector. And it's important to note in particular that that discrimination was not found in the 2015 scheme itself. So when the 2015 reforms were introduced, protections were given for older members so they could stay in their old schemes. And it was that protection that was found to be discriminatory. So it was that element that was found to be discriminatory by the Court of Appeal in 2018. And then we've been through the journey of rectification since then, including the framework of legislation. So to remedy that discrimination that was found, again remembering that the 2015 scheme itself is not discriminatory, everybody has to be treated the same from a certain point. So we can't go back and remove the protections from those members who received them, because that would be levelling down. So we have to top up the pensions of those who didn't receive the protections, so they are treated all the same from a certain point. So from the 1st of April 2022, everybody is now in the 2015 scheme. There is no protections. And we refer to remedy as the retrospective exercise to go back and retrospectively amend the period for which the discrimination was there. So the remedy is an opportunity to do that topping up, to keep everybody the same. It's not rectifying a 2015 benefit that was paid incorrectly. So how we do that, how does remedy work? What the regulations and the framework have allowed for is a process where all members are rolled back to the legacy scheme. So essentially they're put back in their original scheme for the remedy period. And then they're going to be allowed to make a choice at some point for alternative benefits. And the reason that they're allowed to make that choice for alternative benefits is it's not always the case that the legacy scheme is better for somebody. We see that in particular in the 1987 scheme for ill health. The 2015 scheme has an ill health enhancement to the age of 60, so in some scenarios that can be better for a member to be in the 2015 scheme. In terms of when those choices are made, they are made differently depending on the status of the member. So active and deferred members don't need to make choices by the 31st of March 2025. While they do need to receive a statement, it is for information purposes only, and it also helps them inform them around if they want to make a contribution adjustment at that point, but they don't need to. And there's around 125,000 active members who will receive that statement. Again, they do not need to make a choice at that time, it's for information only. The immediate choice members, which are people who've already had benefits in payment during that period, so pensioners or beneficiaries of deceased members, do need to make a choice. And the numbers that we have is that there are around 37,500 retired officers in that period between the 1st of April 2015 to the 31st of March 2022. Significantly, 81% of that number were protected in the legacy scheme already, so they did receive those protections. So they're unlikely to make a choice for alternative benefits, give or take a few extreme examples. So what that leaves us with is a remaining cohort of around 7,200 members who do need to receive statements and make choices. And the breakdown of that in particular as well with regards to what that choice might look like for them. Just under 5,000 of that number were what called taper protected members, which means that they were in the legacy scheme for some point and they were then in the 2015 scheme for a different point. So that means that the level of benefits or the level of rectification is smaller than for those who were completely unprotected. And there are around 1,500 members who received no protection who've retired from the 1987 scheme in that point. It's important to note particularly that those members who did retire with no protection would have done so earlier than necessary under the regulations. So the regulations have a retirement date generally of 30 years or 55. Those members would have been protected. So that 1,500 members who have retired with no protection did so voluntarily early. That's not to dismiss by any means those who felt they had no choice to leave the police service, but it means that they didn't have to under the police regulations. I'm happy to explain some of the further information or further details around some of the difficulties that have been encountered with rolling out those statements to particularly those 7,000 members. Or take any questions.
Well, that's very helpful setting out that and setting out the numbers. I just wondered, do you think there has been clarity for everyone to understand exactly what is going on? Because obviously pensions can be quite complicated and complex to understand. Do you think that the approach that's been taken by all the police forces in letting their members know what's going on, letting the people who've retired or are still serving know, do you think that that's been the case? Or do you think that hasn't been communicated well?
So the scheme is administered what's called locally. So essentially the way the police scheme works is there are 43 individual scheme managers who appoint an administrator, as we've said, with 12. So that local effect has, as it does across policing anyway, because of that local effect, it has a different effect in consistency. So we do see difference in consistency with regards to how people carry out that role. But in terms of the national communications, and we've just released a document that sets out what the communications were and what the period was of when people were there, all the information has been available. Nevertheless, as you pointed out yourselves, pensions are difficult to communicate across the pensions industry. We talk a lot about pension communication and how that's done, and how do you convey difficult information in a way that's for members to understand. The team, and so nationally there wasn't ever a pensions team. Nationally there wasn't a pensions team in place until September 2021. And under that team we have created those national communications for schemes to use. And in particular the pinpoint was in September we were able to create a national website that actually has all of that information there. But before that point there was the communication there, but we do recognise engagement is difficult to get. So despite that website being there, our Google Analytic numbers show that we've only had 3,000 visitors to our remedy information page. So the information is there, so we think that the communications have been good, they've been well thought through, they've been well planned. I have been running a session for stakeholders, an hour session fortnightly, since September to make sure every single stakeholder understands what's happening, and obviously then it's for disbursement. But there is, I think, as there is across the pensions industry, an engagement that it's hard to overcome sometimes and dispel the myths and the misinformation from the factual information. But yeah, the communications are there, but we do recognise that engaging on them is a difficult task.
Right, okay, that's very helpful. I think, Mr. Hope, we want to bring in you to explain now where you think the problems are here and what's gone wrong.
Yes, thank you. I think effectively, Mrs. Alcock there mentions about communication, and I think this has always been the issue from the start, that communication, from our perspective, has been very poor. I did a quick straw poll of communication in terms of the remedy and what people knew about the remedy, whether they believed that they were going to get the remedy upon implementation in October 2023, or if they knew there was an 18-month window for that to be implemented. And I think the information is in front of you in a document I prepared earlier for you, that 83% of the uptake, I think it's 515 votes, 83% believed that they were getting the remedy in October 2023, which is clearly not the case. My personal view of communication has been that it's woeful. I have tried on numerous occasions to engage both the MPCC and XPS in communication. I've offered olive branches on several occasions and received no information literally directly to me. I tried to offer the Facebook page as a tool in order to get the information out there. There's 13,500 members on there. I'm not saying that every one of those people are affected at this moment in time with regarding remedy, but there is a huge number of officers, many retired, who could have been communicated with via the page. I offered it to be done so that links were provided to the page so that we had no editorial control over what was being said. It would be simply from either the MPCC or XPS, and that they could send the link and I could forward it on to members to say there's been an update from XPS, there's been an update from the MPCC. There you go, and that people can interpret that as they need. So from my perspective, the communication has been absolutely dreadful. For example, when I retired in November 2022, I was under the understanding that I would receive my remedy in October 2023, so therefore made the decision to retire a little bit early, knowing I would have a lower pension, but that I would be able to use my lump sum that I would get to top up that pension every month, so that by October, when I believed I was getting the remedy and would have the money that I was owed, it would all work out and I would be able to put my lump sum back in and I will be back where I should be. However, as I said before, in around April, May last year, it was only via social media. It was nothing official. It was via social media that I learned about this 18-month window, which caused me to actually set up the Facebook group. So it was then transpired, obviously, very quickly that there were hundreds, thousands of officers who were affected and totally confused with regards to what was going on regarding the remedy. And as I say, the communication, from my perspective and from many officers on the group, it's been really, really poor, despite the fact I have tried and tried so many times, certainly last year, when the remedy was about to be implemented, to get communication going between the stakeholders and us, because as retired officers, there is no official support, for want of a better word, in terms of people trying to back us up. So we had to do it ourselves. But there was basically, the Federation don't really have much engagement at all with retired officers. There is NARPO, but there didn't seem to be any uptake from NARPO despite me asking them. So we ended up having to deal with this ourselves, really. And I think in terms of communication, I understand it can be difficult to get communication to retired officers. However, XPS and all the pension administrators have emails for every officer. They have to have emails as they communicate with us. So there is nothing to say that they couldn't have communicated stuff to us directly via email and kept us up to date with what was going on, because we just feel we've been left completely in the dark with what is actually going on. And this may be mentioned later in the hearing today, but obviously we're at a point at this moment in time, 7 months in, where we haven't had one remedial statement sent out to any officer. 7 months in, with another 9 months to go before the deadline. So we're completely left in the dark. Right. As to what's going on.
Okay, and we will ask Mr Watkins about the remedial statements in a moment. Can I just ask you, because you've given your example about the decision you took and how it's affected you, have you got any other examples you could just share with the committee that officers have taken on the basis of what they understood was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult. I mean, there was over 200 emails sent to MPs when we started this campaign sort of in January time. Basically, I asked officers to put in their own words exactly how this was affecting them. So there's many exampple throughout of officers who have taken the decision either to retire early or indeed have done the 30 years, but believing they were going to get the money in October. And because they haven't, you've got officers who have fallen back on mortgage payments, you've got officers who are ill health retired, expecting money to come through to make memories. There are some officers who are terminally ill. They are trying to make memories with family, with their children, sometimes with parents, and they haven't got the financial backing to be able to do that. As an example, this isn't a particular person who's ill health retired, but just to put it in perspective, you have officers who have been retired for a number of years who are owed over £600 per month on their pension and around £45,000 in lump sum. And we're not talking small amounts of money here, we're talking about life-changing amounts of money. And the added stress as well of not knowing when they're getting that money with no communication is having an impact on them from a mental health point of view, creating stress, anxiety, and spoiling what should be their retirement years. I'll always enhance ill health retired. Many of these officers have become ill health retired as a result of doing their job. And as a result of that, they are thinking, well, I'll be looked after in retirement, but they're not getting that. They're not being looked after. They're not having what they need effectively. Okay. And it's just creating. It's the anxiety. It's the stress, and it's the not knowing which is causing all the issues. Which is why I have to go back always to communication. There is an understanding that the issue is complex and it will take time. We all as a group understand that. It's the sheer lack of communication that's creating all this stress and anxiety. And there are some officers who I have had directly to me in tears on the phone, not knowing how they're going to cope, not knowing, frightened that they're not going to see the money because they are so poorly. And it's pretty heartbreaking, to be honest, to hear that and to know that it feels like, and maybe jumping the gun a bit here in the proceedings, but it just feels like there's an element of a lack of planning, and had there been better planning, this would have been dealt with far more smoothly. Okay. And the communication tools set up to let us know how it's proceeding. Right. And I think that's the main issue, is the lack of communication.
Right. Well, I think this is a good chance now to hear from Mr. Watkins about what he has to say about communication and about how this is being relayed to people.
Absolutely. I guess the first thing I'd say is that I'm very grateful for Anthony and for others to bringing forward those stories. I mean, there's no disagreement at all between us in terms of the priority and the need to help officers, to support them, their right to retire in a positive way. All of that, I think we can completely sign up to. I think there is some truth in there in relation to communication. I mean, Claire and Anthony have both touched on this. I think communications in the pension space has always been difficult. Trying to communicate very difficult concepts, and I think Claire articulated that quite well earlier on. Trying to communicate those types of facts to officers is not an easy job. I would say, as you said earlier, I don't speak for all administrators, but I think they would agree that this is very much has to be, and it has been, a collegiate effort across all of the different stakeholders. There are a significant number of stakeholders involved in delivering a positive outcome. I'll quickly run through, I think, in a moment, give you the context of what we're doing, our role in this, and where we are with it. But on that communication piece, I'm very happy to make a commitment to Anthony and to others in this room and outside of it that we will do all we can to resolve the challenges around communications, and we've got some good ideas, I think, around how we could do that, and I will certainly reach out to Anthony and have that conversation. I don't think we've had the pleasure of talking previously, but I know that he has spoken to colleagues certainly prior to Christmas. And I just repeat, my personal commitment and that of XPS in terms of doing all we can to help officers that are suffering financial distress or anxiety. We certainly appreciate the importance of getting to that. In terms of our role, I think we've already rehearsed the sort of size of the market. We work with 32 forces to deliver day-to-day administration, and we are also tasked with delivering the immediate choice project completion for those forces as well. That covers 32,116 officers. So it's quite a large number, quite a large proportion of the market. In terms of membership, I think our total membership is just under 200,000, which is around about 55% of the total size of the market. So I think the 37,000 number that Claire referenced, my expectation would have been it was slightly higher, but as I understand it, that's the number that MPCC have. We have actually issued 252 RSS remedial service statements, so that may be news to Anthony. That's obviously, I don't say that to claim that represents a huge step forward, but it's certainly the beginning. It's probably worth me trying to describe briefly the reliance we have on forces to provide data. One of the requirements, one of the data collection process that we have to complete in order to be able to process RSS statements is substantial. There's a huge burden on forces to collect that.
Is it a problem having 43 forces dealing with this individually? I mean,
Claire touched on that earlier, and I think she was right to say that does create logistical challenges. Yeah. I think it's a factor. I think MPCC have worked incredibly hard to try to pull that together and continue to do so. But again, equally, I certainly recognise that even from our perspective, conversations with 32 forces. We met all of them on Monday. We do that regularly every 4 to 6 weeks. There's very open dialogue. The communication piece is not easy because XPS can do what XPS can do, but forces have that responsibility too. NPCC have played a very important role. I recognise and I'm grateful for the work that Anthony and others do as well to try to reach out to members. It has been difficult for us in the past to embrace the idea of directly accessing social media as a formal part of our communication strategy, but I'm very keen to kind of have that dialogue and try to find a way of making that work if I can. We have other ideas in terms of perhaps video content rather than just having communication that is all paper-based, to hopefully cut through some of the terminology, making ourselves available for direct discussions, etc., etc. But just to come back to because I know we're pressed for time, 252 RSS statements have been issued. That is a step in the right direction. But we are engaged in, I think, very positive conversations with forces. Can I just stress that how difficult this is for them as well to collect this data, going back over 7.5 years. Some of them are reliant on external payroll providers, so it's not even within their own control. So we are working with them to do what we can to provide assistance. Once the data is provided, we have to validate that, so sometimes there's a bit of toing and froing until you reach a point that you're confident to proceed. Outside of data, and I'm sure Claire will agree with this, there have been a couple of technical challenges around how interest is applied to remediated benefits, how tax is treated. These things have added a layer of complexity to an already complex situation, and I think that both of those topics also lend themselves, I think, very helpfully to the comments that Anthony has made around communication, trying to explain to somebody in one of the circumstances, an ill health retirement, for instance, that we can't pay a benefit because there's outstanding clarification on technical points, obviously doesn't get you very far, and I completely understand that. Yeah, and there are mechanisms for forces to be able to escalate those cases to us.
Okay, can I just ask, of the 252, obviously you've got to get these out to everybody by the end of March 25.
Yeah.
So that's quite a small number you've managed to do so far.
That's correct.
And as I understand it, you've got this new system that you're going to do everything through. So these have been done under the old system, have they?
We've done these cases, we effectively run these cases through a standalone automation tool. We've used them to effectively, as part of our creation of our longer term tool. We have run nearly 6,000 cases through the internal tool, but we're not in a position to be able to issue statements on those because of I think the interest issue is now resolved, as I understand it, but tax issues remain. Right. So once those things are resolved, then we'll be able to proceed at pace, and I think that's quite important. And we have built, notwithstanding the reliance on data, at this point in time, we've collected only 30% of the data that we need. We've communicated to forces that we need all of the outstanding data to be provided by the end of June. That's the latest in a series of targets. But all forces, I can see myself personally that all of them are working very hard. Some of them are struggling with resource. Some of them are struggling with external payroll providers. Some of them are struggling with the fact that some of the data has been placed out of reach. I've seen one example of that as a consequence of GDPR, because it goes back a number of years. But notwithstanding that, I think the vast majority of forces are making good progress, and some are very close to having completed all of their data. So right here and now, as I speak today, there is a rising level of confidence that by the end of June we'll be in a better place.
Right, I think some of my colleagues want to come in, so Simon Fell.
Thank you, and thank you for your evidence so far. I just want to pick up on the communications point, if I may. If I start with you, Claire. You were talking about the information got out on the website, but the struggle to try and get people to engage with that. I'm just wondering if you've looked across, I recognise this is a challenge across pensions generally and trying to get people to engage, but have you looked across other sectors to try and see how to drive up that engagement and get more people involved?
Yes, we have, and we are in no dissimilar position to all the other public sector schemes with regards to communicating remedy. We do have, I talked about difficult for engagement, we do have a more engaged group than other public sectors do. So we do have a group of members who are there, but I think, as I say, our numbers show that the information is out there and yet people aren't accessing it. So yeah, we do look to look at others. And I think I just wanted to touch on, Dame Diana mentioned around, this 43 way of doing it doesn't seem to be helping us. And I think I do just want to point out we do have a future plan around that. So in September, Chiefs are meeting to look at a business case that actually looks at creating a single scheme manager body. That single scheme manager body would actually then have part of those sorts of plans is a communication arm for which we can actually do that centrally. One of the difficulties or challenges that MPCC currently face is MPCC is just a collaborative body that supports the 43 scheme managers. So NPCC themselves are not a member-facing unit. So we create tools and resources for the scheme managers to use, but then our ability to help them use that doesn't extend that far. So that has been recognised with regards to what are those challenges, how can we, 43 ways of doing it doesn't seem to be, not that that's in the regulations, so that's the way it was set out. So so it has been a recognised issue, and we are taking that forward with that paper to chiefs in September with regards to a single scheme manager body that would allow coordination of some of that at a central being, which would allow for a more digital communication platform, so creating even something ourselves on social media and actually reaching out further. So that is absolutely the plans going forward, but it's just not been in place while we've been managing this project.
And can I ask, because one of Anthony's points was around, he has a platform with a good number of members on there, so what's the reluctance to share or engage via that platform?
So we have governance sort of forums really for sharing information. So we share the information with scheme managers. The links have made its way onto that social media platform through people that we know are there, but then they're not read or taken up. So as I say, we've got the stats say 3,000. So there's no reluctance to ensure that members are aware of the information that is on the website. But that misinformation and myths is hard to overcome.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Hope wants to come
back.
And
Anthony, if I just bring you in on that same point.
Yeah, I think in listening to that, I appreciate the fact that saying that we could potentially use this group. I'm just concerned that we've asked for that on numerous occasions, and we've been completely closed down on it. I appreciate Mrs. Alcock has mentioned that there's a website that they have, Police Pensions Info, which is an NPCC website with regards to the remedy, but it's not kept up to date. There is information on there that is months and months old. So, for example, there is a timeline for the remedy to be rolled out, and that is exactly the same. I've not looked at it in the last couple of days, but from a few days ago, it's exactly the same as it was back in September, and that has clearly slipped. So if you're going to have a website that is going to provide information to officers, then it needs to be kept up to date and improved all the time, and that hasn't been. And I think that's one of the concerns, that if there is going to be communication, it needs to be timely and it needs to be accurate and up to date, so that people, when they go on, are aware of exactly where we're at with regards to the remedy rollout. Because as I've mentioned here, it's the first time I've learnt today about 252 RSSs being sent out. I'm not aware of that. As far as we were concerned, from a Freedom of Information request we did some time ago, that it was 0, or a couple of months ago. So I really do want it to be, something that is kept up to date, so that when people go on it, they can find information that is relevant, because at the moment some of it isn't.
Thank you, and that's useful information. I'm sure it'll shape some of our recommendations coming out of this. Just one question for all three of you, really. Do you think there's a role for government in trying to improve remedy for officers?
If I can, I would like to explain what the technical issue is that we've been experiencing since January, because I think it answers that question exactly.
Just very short of time, though, so if you could make it brief, that would be helpful.
It's an important part of why there's been delays, and in terms of government. So we have been dealing since January with a very unexpected and complex issue, which has been difficult to convey concisely to members. We have just published a document that explains that issue, and we've also just published an age discrimination project update that actually lists all the changes to the website, and all the times they've done, what the changes to the FAQs and all of those things. So that information is there, including when we have updated our timetable, and it does show the dates we've updated our timetable. But just to explain that issue, and it's around, we talked around the interest and lump sum and tax, but they are very, very particular to police. So the Treasury directions said, when it's specified an 18-month period, because the Treasury directions say that this has to be done within 18 months, so by the 31st of March 2025, but it also applied an interest rate of 8% to those pension payments that were had been originally underpaid and will now being paid. So all of those pensions are being paid with an 8% interest rate. We also have in police what we call unauthorised lump sums. They happen all the time, and that's because the value of the lump sum that's being paid to them is over what's called a pension commencement lump sum. It's a value of the pension. And the portion of pension, a lump sum that's over that, is called unauthorised, and it has a tax charge of 40% attached to it.
Okay, we're getting into very technical detail.
Yes, it is very
here.
technical.
And we are not the sort of pensions committee.
No, I absolutely appreciate that. I think the issue that we've had is HMT advised us in January that 8% would now be treated as unauthorised over a certain amount, and that's taken 4 months for them to rectify. So we've been at the whim essentially of HMT and HMRC while they've been working through that issue. And then we've also got a new issue that we're working through with regards to that value of lump sums. So there is documentation that's just been released about it, but as you can tell from my explanation here, it is quite detailed and very complex, and it keeps changing really quickly.
Okay, I think Mr. Watkins wants to come in. Yeah.
So I appreciate we're up against it for time, so I'm just going to say very quickly, I just want to reiterate our commitment to get the job done, to get these statements out by the end of March. We haven't missed that target. We are working very hard to achieve it. Forces are working really hard. I definitely recognise the challenges with communication. There are multiple sources. When you think about the kind of landscape, the number of administrators, the number of members that you're communicating to, the number of voices, I think there is an opportunity for us to think about maybe communicating differently through different media. Anthony, I'll say to you directly, I hear what you're saying in terms of previous attempts. My commitment to you today publicly is to engage and have that conversation. I'm very keen to do that. So the commitment is wholehearted from our perspectives.
I think that would be very positive, actually, because it seems to me you've got someone here who you could have a very effective relationship with in getting information out to people. So, Mr. Hope, I think you wanted to come back.
I thank Mr. Watkins for the offer of communication, which is something that, as I said, I've tried numerous times and it's failed to materialise, and I hope that commitment publicly is now going to materialise. I think, just speaking for the members as a whole, and I appreciate, as you said, that we are limited on time, but the concern has always been it feels a lack of planning, and we are 8 months into this situation now, 7 months into this situation now, where 252 have been issued out of 37,000, or whatever the figure actually is, because there seems to be several figures banding about today. The concerns are that we reach March 2025, and if it isn't done, what are the plans for XPS and the other pension administrators when that happens, or if that materially happens? Where did they go with that? There is a clause, and again, I don't want to go into the full details of it, but there is a particular piece of legislation, and we are concerned that Section 29, Part 10B of the Act, I won't go through it all now, states that there can be an extension to that period under certain conditions. Now, a letter sent by XPS, created by XPS around March time, that was given to us by Derbyshire Police, has stated that there is, the wording was, let me just make sure I get this right for you. The wording is, it says it is not expected to be used to push back deadlines for the issuance of the RSSs. And the wording is somewhat a bit concerning to me. It's not expected. It's not saying it is not going to be used. And that is our concern, that there could be several thousand still to go at March.
Yeah.
Are they then going to try and utilise that piece of legislation to extend it further and cause further anxiety, stress and financial hardship for affected officers? It could end up being an ongoing issue for months, maybe years, with all these complexities going on that Mrs. Alcock has mentioned. It is complicated, yes, but in the end, there are people, real people at the end of this, who are suffering immeasurably, and I cannot, emphasise that enough.
Okay.
That is the case.
Thank you, Mr. Hope, because I think you've served your purpose very well by setting out your concerns around this whole situation. I think both of our witnesses in the room are hearing loud and clear that better communication and providing that information in a timely way to reassure people is going to be the way forward. I think from what we're all hearing today, it seems to me that we're all wanting to get to the same point of sorting this out, but communication seems to have perhaps not been as good as it could have been for various reasons, and there looks like steps to try and improve that in place. We are going to have to move on to our second panel, but I wanted to say, Mr. Hope, that could you let the committee know how things go? Because in terms of this communication, I'm very hopeful that we might be able to improve the situation from what's being said by our two witnesses.
Yeah, and I think we are too, and we will certainly, I'm sure Claire will say the same, we'll keep you updated as well.
Yes, please do.
And I will take an action to write to you and to Anthony to answer the question that you raised there at the end. There is no intention for XPS to lobby or recommend for the target to move, and that is our role. The scheme manager are the ones that make that determination. We would make a recommendation.
And I think we'll probably want to write to the policing minister to support the proposal around having one administrator. I think that sounds a very sensible way forward.
Single scheme manager.
A single scheme manager, sorry.
Yeah, it's important because we might still have 12 administrators.
Yes.
If I may, if I could urge those watching in terms of that additional information that we haven't been able to get out today, there is a document on our website under additional information which has a long explanation of how the remedy looks, what the problems have been, and in particular addresses with regards to that section 29 point. With regards to that's a scheme manager discretion, it's not an administrator discretion, and there's case law about using it. So I think the concerns that people have about it being used are unlikely to be able to be used in law. There's very specific reasons that you can use those kind of clauses. So we have explained that. So I think I urge people to read that document and then absolutely willing to take questions about it.
Can I thank all three of you for the session? I'm sorry it's been a short session, but I think we've got to the nub of the issue, which is about you all need to talk to each other, I think. Seems to me.
Agreed.
But thank you very much for your time, and please keep in touch with the committee because we are keen to follow the progress on this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we'll move to our second panel. Thank you. You waiting. We're very keen to hear from you. We are up against the clock, unfortunately, because it is Prime Minister's question time at 12 noon, and we do have members who've got questions in the House before that. So can I just get each of you to introduce yourself in turn? Mr. Rhodes, would you like to start?
My name's Andy Rhodes. I served as 30 years as a Chief Constable and I now run the National Police Wellbeing Service, which is situated inside the College of Policing.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you. Paul Williams. I'm a serving police officer of 24 years. I work full-time for the Federation on the National Board on co-lead for Wellbeing.
Thank you. Dr. Miller.
Hi, I'm a neuropsychologist and a sociologist at the Department of Sociology at the University of Cambridge, and I specialise in trauma and wellbeing in police and emergency response.
Thank you. We're going to move straight to questions from members. I'm going to come to Kim Johnson first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. I have a question on compensation, and I don't know which one of you are best placed to answer the question, but we know that the threat of violence and serious injury sustained in the line of duty is a major concern for police officers, and I know that the Police Federation have some concerns in terms of the compensation process, and that the Minister is looking to take a different pathway in terms of compensation. So I just wanted to know whether any of you could update and say a little on that point, please. Go on then, Paul, thanks.
Very good question, and it's recognised that currently the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board that victims of crime use for violent crime is not fit for purpose for police officers, because as a police officer, that is not a line of claim that an officer can go down if they receive serious injury. And when we're talking serious injury, we're talking potential fractures and anything that can be compensated, if judged by the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, up to and well over £1,000. However, police officers are restricted from claiming that because they are police officers, and the only mechanism for compensation is through a prosecution or a court conviction, whereas the individual is then subject to court costs and potentially fines that, as we know, can take months, potentially years, if any compensation is finally awarded to the police officer. Given those serious injuries that the police officer can receive, can put them out of work for a considerable amount of time, lead to disability, lead to ill health, retirement potentially, and lack of overtime, and sometimes can be potentially career ending. So any form of compensation or route to compensation is a very important one. It's something that as a wellbeing group we have started to push on, to try and have an appropriate route for applying and receiving compensation for officers that are injured in the line of duty.
But have you heard or seen anything in terms of the Minister looking to use a different pathway in terms of officers accessing compensation?
Through the parliamentary group on the Federation, the update that we've received so far is that the Policing Minister has been spoken to around it. The uptake has been slow, and the appetite, I think, is negligible. However, there has been a nod of acknowledgement that the CICA for police officers isn't fit for purpose. As far as getting a body applied for officers to get compensation, I would say that's quite a long way away.
Do you have a personal opinion yourself, Paul?
Yes.
You able to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a police officer for well over 20 years. I've been on the front line for a majority of that. I've been injured quite severely in the past through assaults and various attacks on myself. And the level of compensation awarded has been not just minimal, but, and I will use the word insulting, through the level of injury and the amount of time I've spent off work in recovery of that. So my opinion is this is long overdue.
Thanks, Paul. Andy, you wanted to come in?
Yes, it's been raised by the Police Federation up to the Police Government Oversight Board, which is chaired by the Police Minister. And as Paul said, there's been a little bit of early work done to engage with Criminal Injuries Compensation Board about this, because the feeling that we get is that the ethos now is it's part of your job, you should expect this. I think that's also seen in some cases that the Police Federation are compiling from court appearances, even into sentencing as well, where we don't feel as though that is being treated in the spirit of the Emergency Service Workers Act, which isn't just for policing, but there should be more serious penalties for people who attack our emergency service workers who are just doing their duty. So I think it's a wide issue, and it's been raised at the Police Government Oversight Board, but there's definitely more work to do to engage properly with the CICB.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Miller, did you want to comment on any of that?
I mean, all I would say really is that from a trauma point of view, that physical injury and assault really is a predictor for complex PTSD in certain situations. And we know that already that over 1 in 5 serving officers are likely to have PTSD, complex PTSD being the most common and the most expensive to treat and harder to recover from. So anything to do with supporting officers through compensation claims, I think, would be beneficial a lot further down the line as well. So yeah, I'd advocate that.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Mr Williams, in 2023, your National Chair, Steve Hartshorn, said that officers were reaching breaking point. How would you describe the levels of well-being, particularly among the rank-and-file officers at the moment?
Thank you again. Great question. I will say complete crisis. The pay and morale survey sums it up every year. I have stats with me, but it's extremely poor to think in this day and age with the complexity of policing and the scrutiny that policing comes under, that we've got 82% of respondents to the survey indicating that they've had experiences of stress, well-being, low mood, and anxiety and other problems with the mental health, which obviously leads, if not checked, to incredibly debilitating illnesses, and effectively can put cops out of action for such a long time. The numbers are increasing. The officers themselves have a huge increase in workload. The complexity and the nature of those crimes that they're investigating, along with frontline policing, are sending them spiralling into extreme mental distress. And as we have uplift in one hand, where we're increasing numbers of police officers on the street, we are also having an increase in numbers of police officers who are leaving. So an increase in attrition rates, increase in ill health retirement, certainly through mental health, and an increase, strangely enough, in claims for discrimination around mental health, around the PTSD, because it then becomes a disability. And police forces, this is a new thing to police forces, don't know how to deal with this, and then find themselves having to deal with this under regulations of discipline or performance, which leads to potential discrimination claims. So we have a whole host of branches coming off the effects, the crisis we have in mental health with policing at the moment.
Have you noticed that those levels of well-being differ between different groups particularly? So I'm thinking whether it's women or whether it's different ethnic backgrounds, for example. Is there a differential, or is there a noticeable pattern that you've seen at all?
There's a huge differential. I've done some research with our claims team. As a staff association body, we represent officers and potentially take litigation against police forces for discrimination. So in obtaining stats of discrimination, there are a whole host of issues, but looking at the top 5 discrimination claims we have. So for example, since 2021 in January, we've had up to date 1,590 discrimination claims against forces. The top 5 being disability, which is 506, part-time working, which is 475, race discrimination, which is 126, sex discrimination, which is 177, and victimisation, whistleblowing, at 72. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Miller, your research on this, what has that revealed about the levels of mental well-being in the police service, and does any of it seem to relate to what Paul has just said?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely does. The main bulk of the research was carried out in 2019, so the data set really reflects 2018. I think we have to kind of be mindful we've obviously been through a global pandemic and so on and so forth since then. I think the most alarming discovery really, first of all, was the levels of trauma impact within forces, but it was also the effect that trauma exposure was having on even the healthy officers. So this is not talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, this is about healthy officers doing their job. We can't remove that trauma exposure on the front line, but we do need to do things to improve people's resilience and teach them how to actually adapt in a positive way. Another really striking element of the research, which we published last year, was around working conditions. It wasn't something that we expected. Professor Brendan Birchall at Cambridge and myself looked at this variation between the 43 forces. It can actually be really fruitful to look at those variations. It can be a pain in lots of ways, but we were able to ascertain that there are 5 things within forces that predicted PTSD more. So there are 5 different types of working conditions that actually increase levels of post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is actually showing that the way that we are with our employees and our officers and staff determines how safe they are. This isn't about what they go through and what they experience, it's about how we treat that. So that was the first indication that actually we can do something at force level, and we can be potentially inspected on that to actually really make a difference and bring those numbers down. And that really was quite a breakthrough. We've never seen that before in the research, and this makes the research become very practical and a very operational view on how we can improve police wellbeing. So we're keen to move on that and actually start to get some of those findings into daily practice.
Yeah, and does the wider police culture have an impact on wellbeing, would you say?
It certainly does, and I think at the moment, perhaps in light of the case review, we are actually struggling with the public perception of policing as well. And components of shame really do paralyse people in help seeking. And one thing that I did notice with some work with officers, qualitative work with officers, was that for the first time there is an element of not being proud of what they do because of the reputation that policing has had recently. And that's all, first of all, very tragic for police officers and their families, but it's also not a good sign for mental health and their own resilience. Makes help seeking difficult, problematic, and it is quite a worry. And I think changing the culture sounds like it could be a massive thing that is unachievable, but I think by looking at how we speak to each other, the common language that we use in policing, what we pay attention to, we can really move that forward. But I think we have to be brave with it.
Thank you. And Mr. Rhodes, is that your impression, or do you share that view, or do you have a different perspective?
Yes, I think over my 30 years things have changed a lot. Generationally we've changed, society's changed, but you've got a workforce where their cup is already pretty full with traumatic exposure, shift working, that type of thing. So when organisational factors play in, and we do our own big national survey, 4,000 to 6,000 respondents, and the big message that came out of that, and when we looked at all the surveys together, is that how you run your organisation is something you have more control over than what happens on the street, and that is something that we should focus on. Line manager relationships, resources, logistics, how you manage change, all these things are massively important in terms of supporting mental health of your workforce.
Thank you. Anything to add on that, Mr. Williams?
Yes, and I think it boils down to the culture. I think that was a really good term to use, because the culture of, this is no insult to chief constables who have worked their way up the career and are long serving, the culture that they entered into at the beginning of policing, frontline policing, was entirely different to what it is now. So they have a different cultural view on how to treat wellbeing and mental health with police officers. So with 43 different forces being governed by 43 different personalities as such, and an embedded culture, it's very difficult to entice them into other realms of practice of wellbeing to improve things for officers, and without any kind of mandation. So we can ask for best practice, we can ask for or we can ask for them to apply it to APP. We can recommend things, but we can't mandate things, and without mandating common minimum standards of wellbeing practice across the 43 different forces, it's a very tough uphill struggle to get the appropriate wellbeing practices in place. There's so many good things going on with the Covenant, things like that, you know, and initiatives going on, but to actually push them over the line and get that practice with all forces is another battle altogether. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Which police forces would you highlight as doing wellbeing, mental health support well? Who's achieving out of the 43?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, and we do a lot of work very closely with forces, you have got a good number of forces who are doing really well. I think they understand the problem. They've made the commitment from the executive team, the Chief Constable down, to invest in all the things that we're talking about here, particularly cultural work. And I would put that number at 10, 12 or 14 forces that are doing pretty well on this. And if everybody was...
There's quite a lot that are not doing
it
terribly
does,
well there,
it does,
doesn't
and
it?
our job is to support them and get everybody to raise the bar, which is what we're doing, working with the Inspectorate, the HMI, CFRS, etc.
Which one's the best?
Well, you're going to get me into trouble
pushing
now.
you.
With, but I think Merseyside Police are very good. Durham, Constabulary, Cumbria, Hampshire. These are the forces, Essex and Kent, they are really doing their best. And I have to say that the Metropolitan Police are doing their best with a trauma support model, using some of the research that Jess has done on a grand scale, which is a huge challenge. So, but the Commissioner Mark Rowley's made a big commitment to do that in terms of trauma support for the staff, and I think that sends a signal to every other Chief Constable in the country that if it can be done on that scale and the challenge can be taken there, it can be done everywhere.
Okay. I just want to ask you about levels of suicide and what your view about the support that's being offered in terms of trying to tackle that. Mr. Rhodes, do you want to start?
Yes, so we, a couple of years ago, and through the police covenant, we recruited a chief medical officer now who's taken national lead for workforce suicide, because we realised that we have some catching up to do compared to other emergency services. We've done a lot of work with the armed forces, police covenant team, the paramedics, etc., to look at their approach. We have a national suicide action plan. We've got national oversight from the chief medical officer, but we do not collect data well enough yet about suicides. We get data collected through some of the systems that are in place, but not sufficient to learn enough from those instances of suicide. We have a post-pension approach now that we've worked with the Samaritans that has been used, sadly, but very effectively in some forces, and we're just piloting a mental health crisis line, which is already being used by the firefighters and the paramedics. So it's a real blue light sort of collaboration around that, but we are literally at the stage of being about to switch that on for a limited number of forces. And I think until we start seeing those national data sets come through, we don't totally understand what the early signs of suicide and the problems are in that respect.
Okay. And Dr. Miller?
I was thinking about, I don't specialise in suicide prevention myself, but I have been thinking about it as a phenomenon in policing, and I do think there may be some value in approaching it in a similar way to the way we have done with PTSD, insofar as when we get that data in, to look to see if there are any variations between forces, that we could then identify working conditions and practices within those forces that are either helping or not helping with suicide ideation. I think it's really important to accept the uncomfortable truth that it is not possible to prevent someone from taking their own life, nor is it possible to prevent someone from getting PTSD from the experiences that they have. It is an excruciatingly personal experience. But there are ways to find out the dynamics and influences within a workplace that can support people into a different thought process and to help them become more aware of their thinking and steer their own ship. That's the approach that we take it with PTSD as well. So I really look forward to seeing what data comes out of the suicide prevention work. I think there's definitely a lot of appetite for it. So I'm happy to support that further.
Mr. Williams, do you have anything to say about this?
Absolutely, thank you.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very close to my heart. I've represented many members in my time in the Federation. I've represented members who have taken their own lives as a result of being subject to very lengthy misconduct investigations through no sanction, who have been subject to discrimination and harassment and victimisation. The last member I represented very recently had 3 suicide attempts, very real. And it's clearly due to what they were suffering at work and the lack of help available. So the help available was only through the NHS on the crisis line. And to say that, to be able to say in 2024 that we do not monitor our police officers in the suicide or attempted suicide rate is incredible. It leaves me speechless. It's something that I think is absolutely essential. If we want to get to the bottom of why our police officers are killing themselves, then we need to start measuring, as Dr. Miller says, the stats, the amount, the location and the reasons why, and be serious about it. And we cannot be afraid or hide behind fear of litigation through doing that. We really have to up our game when it comes to suicide, because any mental health condition can lead to that ultimate outcome. And if we spot the early signs and we deal with the early signs, then we can address and hopefully reduce a tragic outcome when very young officers are taking their own lives. Thank you.
Thank you. It's quite shocking that we don't have that data and that information readily available. Can I ask you, because we are going to have to draw things to a close, could I ask each of you in turn, what would be the one thing that you would ask of government that would improve the mental well-being of police officers? I mean, I know that's a big ask, one thing. Mr. Rhodes.
The one thing for me is that we create sufficient investment and support to help the forces who need to put that investment in on their local level to get their services sharp, fast and effective for their staff, and put all the things into place that we're talking about here today, because that is a big stretch for a lot of forces. It's very specialist work, some of it, and that investment is much needed. Some forces can't always recruit people into occupational health because there's big gaps in that workforce nationally, as we all know.
Yes.
So there's issues to address.
Right, okay, Mr. Williams.
Very quickly, a common mandated approach to minimum standards of wellbeing across all 43 forces would be my ask. Thank you.
Right, that's very good, thank you. Dr. Miller.
I'd say mandating trauma impact data collection, just so we can actually face the reality that we already are dealing with, and deal with it responsibly.
Thank you. Well, that's been quite a short session, but I think we've packed a lot in, and policing is something that we will return to time and time again because it's a particular interest, obviously, of the committee. We did our report on the policing priorities a few months ago, and we will, I'm sure, want to be raising with ministers some of the issues you've put to us today. So thank you for your time. Thank you very much. And order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.